Hey everybody out there, it's Pastor John with your Midweek Reflection. We're really spending the month of August talking about rest and why it's so important to us, how it impacts both our relationship with God, our relationship with others, our relationship with the world, and even our relationship with work, which we'll get to in a couple weeks. But last week and this week we're looking at Sabbath, the command to keep the Sabbath holy, the fourth commandment of the 10 commandments, and how it bridges, on one side, our commands that deal directly with our relationship with God, the first through third commands. And on the other side of the Sabbath command is explicitly commands dealing with our relationships with others. And the Sabbath really impacts both or all of those relationships. And so I have a couple of questions for you, a couple things to think about in the next couple of days before we gather for worship on Sunday morning. The first is to take some time to reflect on your patterns of Sabbath, work and rest. But beyond that, break it down even farther, okay? Because not every moment we're not at work is a kind of Sabbath rest. How many of you have ever gone on a vacation? And you've come back after a week on vacation and you've been like, oh, I need a vacation for my vacation. I need rest for my vacation. Because you were touring, you were having fun, you were doing activities that were great, and there's nothing wrong with that, but you weren't necessarily resting and doing things that provided Sabbath and refreshment for your body and for your soul. So what are your patterns, not just of work and rest, but of play, of fun, of relaxation, of leisure, of entertainment? So not all of those are necessarily Sabbath. Lauren and I like to flip on the TV at the end of the day and we'll watch some TV. That doesn't necessarily refresh our bodies and souls. It might provide one need for us, but it doesn't necessarily count as Sabbath rest. Okay, so what are your patterns and cycles of all of those different things? Play, fun, relaxation, and where are you keeping the Sabbath holy? How are you prioritizing your connection with God and really receiving from God the gifts that you need and making sure God and His commands and His call on your life are priorities, because that's what the Sabbath is. Okay, so how are you doing that? What are your basic patterns of work, play, rest, leisure, all of that stuff? The second is to consider, how does your Sabbath, your practice of Sabbath, or your day of rest, how does that impact your relationships and the rest of the week? Okay, so sometimes we think of rest and Sabbath as just getting away, as kind of an escape. And again, we view our faith this way too. Sometimes like church worship or our faith is viewed as, how are we escaping from this world or even the problems, or when we die, how do we escape and get to heaven? Whereas Sabbath, and what we know from the gospel and the incarnation of Jesus, is that faith and rest are not about escape, but about renewal and reframing and reshaping and how we exist in the world. All right, so Paul says, do not be conformed any longer to the patterns of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. That is what Sabbath is about, making sure we have time to have our minds renewed. So how we understand God, how we understand ourselves, how we understand other people, how we understand the world, are all meant to be renewed during that practice of Sabbath. So how does your practice of Sabbath impact the other days of the week? How does your practice of Sabbath impact how you approach your coworker, or your husband or wife, or your children, or your neighbors? Okay, so how is your practice of Sabbath overflowing and impacting how you exist in the world? So that's the second question for you to reflect on, and how that Sabbath is being fruitful in your life, for yourself and for God's kingdom and for others. So it's just some things to think about as you prepare for Sunday. As always, I look forward to worshiping with you as we live the gospel life together. And until then, may God bless you.